Now, I'm not gonna lie, this video probably should have been out like a month and a half ago, but to my defense, I just thought the NBA offseason was a little too slow, not enough moves being made, so I just gave the opportunity to some of these teams to make some trades, make some decisions because a lot of rumors were circulating. So I sat back and I waited a little bit longer, packed my things, moved in a new house, kept waiting, but my goodness, it's the beginning of September, training camp, preseason, all that is right around the corner, like in about 2 to 3 weeks to about a month, and at this point, I'm gonna be honest with you, bro, I've done enough waiting. At this point, bro, if you have not made a decision on what you want to do with your franchise, quite frankly, that is a problem and we have to discuss and talk about it. So in today's video, we're going to talk about all the bad decisions and mistakes that some of these teams have made and just quite frankly, sum up some of the most lost and dysfunctional organizations in the NBA, especially in this past summer. Now, the first team we're talking about, I will be brief because we've already made an entire video on it and there's a lot of other teams to discuss throughout this video. So just quickly, the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors, as many of us know, the summer has been chock full with a bunch of rumors and dialogue around Kuminga, the Warriors, the dynamic between the two entities, and more importantly, the type of contract that he's supposed to receive. In short, Kuminga is a young player who has a lot of upside to a lot of people's eyes, including myself, but unfortunately, that upside may not always be on display for an organization that just quite frankly has not been prioritizing him whatsoever. I do believe that Steve Kerr has done him a massive disservice, not only due to the role that he's been on, but of course the playing time has been very inconsistent as well. However, I do believe the whole Kuminga saga has been a massive distraction from an organization that has done literally nothing this entire offseason. Actually, let me take that back. They actually have done something, and that is lose Kevon Looney to free agency, which is going to be a major hit to a team that doesn't have that much depth in their front court to begin with. Sure, TJD could potentially fit himself into the starting lineup at the 5 position, but effectively, this is a team that's going to have to rely pretty heavily on Draymond Green playing small ball lineups at the 5 position, which if this was 5-6 years ago, there really wouldn't be that big of a deal. However, at the age of 35, be 36 by the end of the season, I just don't know how sustainable all that is. Add on top of the fact that this is a roster that effectively between Green, Butler, and Curry, they've already committed north of $140 million just in those 3 players alone. And then add on top of the fact that the overall roster itself is $170 million to the payroll. And the only players that they have under contract now is not only Curry, Butler, and Green, but Moses Moody, Buddy Hield, B. Pods, TJD, and Quentin Post. That is literally it. They still have not figured out a situation with Jonathan Kuminga, and all the rumors that circulated around the big addition that they could potentially make is Al Horford. This is an organization that is desperately lacking in talent and has the inability to add someone that could really change or help them out, not only in the present, but in the near future as well with Kuminga, but they're failing at that as well. So yeah, a lot of questions for the Warriors moving forward, and I'm just floored that how many people sold into this idea that Jimmy Butler was going to be this massive addition for them at last year's deadline, because even though, yes, I do believe he was a noticeable upgrade from Andrew Wiggins, what they gave up in the process for Jimmy Butler was a lot of depth for a team that doesn't really have that much depth to begin with. Massive problems that's going on with the Warriors, and to go an entire summer where you're basically not doing anything at all is completely unacceptable. And you know what else is also very unacceptable? Your private information being sold around the world to data brokers. But the one place that can really help you out with this is today's sponsors, Delete Me. Today's video is sponsored by Delete Me. Now, over the past few years, one of the most irritating things I've had to deal with is how often my private information is shared and sold without me even realizing this. Now, originally, I didn't really view this as a big deal, a few spam text messages that I would just brush off. However, after moving and doing some background checks, I quickly realized that my name is associated to some addresses and phone numbers that I've never had. I did some research on why exactly this was happening, learned about some data brokers, and realized they had a lot of my information, my name, phone number, address, email, my mama, my uncle, my auntie, my brother. They knew everything about me. That's why I viewed it very important for me to partner with Delete Me. Delete Me is a service that will search through online data broker sites for your information and remove it. I know it seems as if like I'm oversimplifying the entire process, but no, it's really that simple. You make an account, purchase a service, and give them the amount of information that you're comfortable with, and just like that, a few weeks later, your information will start to be removed from these online data broker sites. And the one thing that I really enjoy about Delete Me is how transparent they are throughout the entire process. They will literally show you all of the online data broker sites that they're searching through, how many of those data broker sites that actually have your information. Then they'll show you them requesting to remove them and how often they're successful in that entire process. And because of that level of transparency, the research I've done with Delete Me, and the fact that I've actually used the service myself, personally, I trust Delete Me to keep my information private. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, make sure you click the link in the description and use my promo code LOWPOST to get 20% off on your purchase. Again, the link in the description, promo code LOWPOST for 20% off. And once more, thank you for Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Now, as bad as the Warriors situation is, somehow it gets significantly worse throughout the NBA, especially in the Western Conference. One team that immediately comes to mind are the Phoenix Suns. As we all know, this past offseason, Phoenix not only lost Kevin Durant, but they also lost Bradley Beal as well. Moving off of Beal might have been a blessing in disguise, but it certainly was a very pricey one, as they had to buy him out of his contract, $50+ million. That's a lot of money to have to pay someone to basically for them not to be on your team. So that's a lot. But then what they decided to do for the remainder of the offseason certainly was questionable, especially because it doesn't really address any concerns that they have in the immediate future nor moving forward. First, what they got in return for Kevin Durant really wasn't much. They lost all leverage in last year's deadline when they tried to move KD without letting him know, and then he kind of just blew up the spot and kind of told everybody that, hey, I don't want to be moved to these teams unless I have a say-so on where I want to go. That was a major problem. So when they moved off of him, the only thing they received in return effectively was a young Jalen Green that has somewhat of an upside, but I don't necessarily know if he's going to be enough on this roster. Mark Williams is another solid addition, but I'm not a big fan of him on a team that doesn't have a quality passer and playmaker. And even though, yes, I do believe that Devin Booker is the cornerstone of this franchise, if the roster is what it's going to be moving forward, and it seems as if like that's what it's going to be, I just don't understand how anyone can comprehend the idea of giving him the type of contract extension that he received from Phoenix. At some point, organizations are going to have to sit back and understand that just throwing this amount of money to players, regardless of how loyal they are to your organization, is not conducive of what you need to do moving forward. Because effectively, for the next 2 to 3 years, the Suns are just going to be Jalen Green, Devin Booker, Dillon Brooks, and a rotation of front court players that really are not going to provide much of anything because, again, they don't have the passing and playmaking that is necessary at the point guard position. There's already news coming out that Devin Booker is going to take on that responsibility. We've seen him do this in the past. He's seen some form of improvement, but not enough to really maximize who Mark Williams is. The defense on this roster, especially on the perimeter, is practically non-existent. And again, even though you can be fairly optimistic about a Mark Williams or a Jalen Green, I just don't know if you can be optimistic about who they can be on this team in particular. Also take into consideration that financially moving forward, this team doesn't have that much flexibility and also has lost a lot of draft capital for the foreseeable future. I just don't understand how this was not a season for them to just punt on Devin Booker, get as much draft capital as they possibly can, and then decide to just blow everything up and rebuild with Jalen Green and whoever else they can get in the process for Devin Booker. And for the people out there who may not be aware of how much money Devin Booker is receiving, he signed a 2-year contract extension of $145 million. In 2029, when he's the age of 32, he's going to be making around $64 million. Then in 2030, when he's 33 years old, he's going to make $69 million. Bro, Devin Booker is nowhere near good enough to justify handing him that type of money. And in this new CBA, where there's going to be organizations that will be very, very hesitant to take on any type of contract like that, tying yourself to Devin Booker in that fashion is just ridiculous. I'm sorry, at some point, you just have to have some form of clarity to move off a player if you don't believe you have the capability of maximizing said player to justify giving them the amount of money that D-Book is going to receive moving forward. And I just don't think that Devin Booker now, and I certainly don't think that he's going to be at age 33, he's going to be good enough to justify handing him nearly $70 million a year. And so for an offseason where you moved off of KD, you moved off of Bradley Beal, in my opinion, it would just make all the sense in the world to just move off of Devin Booker as well. But giving him that type of contract extension on a team that clearly doesn't have the ability to maximize him, you're putting yourself at a major risk to be stuck with him and effectively do the exact same thing you just did with Bradley Beal, where you have to just waive him or just try try to figure out who is willing to take him on a really, really low return. I just don't understand how, if you're Phoenix, you keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. But hey, if you're a Suns fan, at least you can say we don't make as much mistakes as the Sacramento Kings, and boy, would you be right. I have absolutely, positively no idea what the Sacramento Kings are doing whatsoever. And somehow, the best player on the roster has no idea what they're doing either. Rumors have already spiraled pretty quickly about Domantas Sabonis looking for some type of guidance and direction of where the franchise is headed, especially post the whole De'Aaron Fox trade, where they not only gave up De'Aaron Fox, but also a draft pick in the process as well, and got very little in return for him. I have absolutely, positively no understanding to why you would trade De'Aaron Fox in conference to a team that has a young player if you're not going to receive a bunch of draft capital and or young players in return. That makes absolutely no sense. Instead, they decided to effectively just stay the course around the same caliber of player, especially at the age limit of a Zach LaVine, and that has effectively put them in a position to where they're now maxing out. They're at their ceiling already, and it's going to be around a 500 ball club in a very competitive Western Conference. I just don't see how a team with Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, and Domantas Sabonis could convince anyone of any level of basketball IQ that it would justify going into that decision if you have someone of the caliber of De'Aaron Fox that was highly sought out from several other organizations, especially an organization like San Antonio that again had the young players and draft capital to give you, so you could just punt the next year or two away and decide to just rebuild in a more organized situation. But unfortunately, that's the Sacramento Kings, bro. They just do the same mistakes over and over and over again. It will be very interesting to see how long Sabonis is willing to stay on his roster before he starts to make a lot of noise. He's still under contract for the next 3 years, though I highly doubt that he'll stay a Sacramento King all 3 of those years. More than likely will force his way out in the next year or two, especially because both LaVine and DeRozan are only under contract for 2 more years. I can understand how difficult it may be to move off of Zach LaVine making nearly $48 million this upcoming year, but potentially he's going to be on an expiring contract. Sure, he could opt into his player option, but I probably believe he's going to opt out to try to then renegotiate and structure a new deal for a much longer term, especially at the age in which he's at. He's probably looking for a little bit more stability rather than just maxing out for 1 more year financially. So I would assume that in his upcoming year, he probably will be easier to move than originally expected. DeMar DeRozan, maybe not so much, 36, looking at 37, making around 24 to 25 million for the next year or two. So that's going to be a little bit more complicated. However, the one decision I certainly didn't think that they were going to make is potentially moving off of Malik Monk for Russell Westbrook. But hey, that's the Sacramento Kings. Those are the rumors that they're in. But the one team this offseason that I just had no idea what they were doing, like every decision they made this summer, I was just perplexed. I was like, what do they know who's on their team? Like, I don't understand what are they lost? Like, I'm so confused here. That team were the New Orleans Pelicans. What the hell is going on in New Orleans? So first and foremost, let's kind of set the foundation. Last year, a complete and utter mess. A lot of injuries, so some of that is out of their control, and also Zion not really taking things serious. But once more, another year in the Zion era that really led to nowhere. However, there's a lot of really good foundational pieces out there in New Orleans, and that's probably the biggest reason why a lot of this stuff is so frustrating to watch unfold year after year. But even with a lot of really solid foundational pieces, the Pelicans still decided to make some of the most confusing decisions I have seen of any team in this offseason. It first started on draft night when they decided to move up to the 13th overall pick to select Derek Queen, and they effectively swapped picks with the Atlanta Hawks. Now, I like Derek Queen. I actually think he has a lot of upside, showed a lot of promise in Summer League. 6'9", 6'10", forward/center, really good feel for the game, solid passer, has a lot of upside if he can really keep some of his weight down and get in better conditioning. Can certainly be a force on a team, especially coming off the bench in very unique lineups. The only problem is that a lot of that potential more than likely won't be seen because he's playing for the Pelicans that features Zion. Bro, a lot of the things that you get out of Derek Queen, Zion already provides, and even if you think that they could somehow play alongside one another, they certainly don't complement each other enough to justify giving themselves any type of minutes. If you're going to use a draft pick at that selection, it needs to be to maximize who Zion is, not potentially find his replacement, because effectively that's what Derek Queen could potentially be. But hey, if you want to sit here and argue that they just moved up in a very weak draft to receive the most talented prospect that was still available, and just in case things go left with Zion, things could go right with Derek Queen, and he could effectively just replace them and they can move in a different direction. Fair. But that plan ain't good enough to sit there and give up the rights to your 2026 first round pick. Because that's what they did. They not only moved up, but in the process of moving up, they gave Atlanta next year's first round pick, the most favorable one between them and Milwaukee. That's a bad trade. Derek Queen isn't that good. He shows some upside, some promise, but it's just promise. It's not enough to justify giving up a draft pick to do so. So that was mistake number one. Then after that, the first move they decided to make in the offseason was sign Kevon Looney. Why would you sign Kevon Looney and you just traded up to get Derek Queen, as well as give a draft pick away in the process, while also having Zion on your team and you bring in Kevon Looney? None of that makes any sense. How does anyone believe that any of those three players fit alongside one another? And then right after that, they decided to move off of Kelly Olynyk and CJ McCollum to bring in Jordan Poole and Sadiq Bey. First, I need you all to understand again. You have Zion, Kevon Looney, Derek Queen, and now Sadiq Bey. I know all of them don't play the exact same position, but if that's going to be some of the rotational players in your front court, what are we doing, dog? Like, what are we doing? How does any of those players complement each other whatsoever? Because they don't. Then when it comes to the whole CJ McCollum to Jordan Poole transition, no, I'm not going to sit here and trash Jordan Poole anymore. He actually had a really solid season last year, all things considered. Really great stretches for someone who effectively was the only consistent offensive weapon on the team. Though it was the Washington Wizards, and though they were losing a bunch of games, I believe that Jordan Poole is a quality option to have some functional responsibilities within an offense. I think that is a fair assessment of who he has slowly started to become once more. However, I don't think that Jordan Poole on this team makes that much sense, especially because long term, I would assume that you would have DeJounte Murray on the team. Unless you're telling me that you're going to move off of DeJounte Murray because the injury is going to be too overwhelming for him to overcome, and more than likely when he does come back, he's not going to be the same player, which is fair. However, I would probably rather see what that looks like first before you commit to Poole, who has another year on his contract where he's making north of $30 million. In my humble opinion, this year could have just been a transitional year, a punt year, a year where you kind of just figure out how much you can really get out of Zion as a point forward, a passer playmaker, and use a lot of players off ball. CJ McCollum certainly is not the passer and playmaker that a Poole can be, but if you really want to figure out who Zion is as a player, I thought that this could have been the year to really maximize who he is as a player, not put another ball handler next to him that, in my opinion, long term doesn't really fit regardless of what you want to do. This team has a lot of solid pieces around Zion with Trey Murphy and Herb Jones. I actually think that those three lay a really good foundation. Everything else, though, outside of me just being really optimistic on who Jordan Poole is going to be this upcoming year, everything else makes absolutely no sense. And this team just 2 years ago had a lot of things going for themselves, to the point where you could just argue that they were just waiting on Zion to kind of bounce back and materialize into the player that he is. But at this point, the Pelicans just feel like a conglomerate of names rather than a team that can actually build something of significance in the near future. And so I just don't know what you do if you're New Orleans, because I don't know the direction that you're going into whatsoever. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know yours in the comment section below. Are there any teams that I missed out on that are perceived to be a bit lost and confused in the direction they're going into? Also, hit the subscribe button and notification bell, because like I said earlier, bro, the NBA season is much closer than I think a lot of people realize. The Hall of Fame enshrinement is this weekend. About 2-3 weeks later, we have training camp, media day, and then a week right after that, preseason kicks off with some of the overseas basketball. So make sure you tune in, hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.